You make me want to curse you for life. She said this in anger, so I took a stand and said, I'm Ramona, 29 years old, and I once believed family bonds were unbreakable. My mother-in-law, Margaret, seemed like the mother figure I'd been missing until those words spilled from her lips during a heated argument. You make me want to curse you for life. I felt my world crumbling around me, but sometimes the deepest wounds give us the greatest strength. Let me tell you how I finally took a stand that left her face white with shock. Before I begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like and subscribe button to support my channel. My story begins in Maplewood, a small town in Georgia where everyone knew everyone. I grew up in a cozy blue house on Elm Street with my dad and younger brother after losing my mom to cancer when I was just 16. The absence of my mother left a void in my heart that I couldn't seem to fill no matter how hard I tried. I always dreamed of having a big, loving family someday, the kind where Sunday dinners were loud with laughter and holidays were spent making memories together. College was my ticket out of Maplewood. I attended the University of Georgia, where I studied elementary education. It was during my sophomore year in Professor Wilson's Psychology 101 class that I met Jake. He sat behind me, and one day when I dropped my textbook, he picked it up with a smile that made my heart skip. Jake was tall with warm brown eyes and a laugh that could brighten even the gloomiest day. Our romance was a whirlwind. After just 3 months of dating, I knew he was the one. We spent endless nights talking about our dreams, our childhoods, and the family we wanted to create together. Jake often spoke fondly of his mother Margaret, describing her as caring, devoted, and his biggest supporter after his father passed away when he was 12. I was excited about the prospect of having a mother-in-law, especially since I'd been without maternal guidance for so long. The first time I met Margaret was during spring break of our junior year. Jake took me to his childhood home, a charming Victorian house, with a wraparound porch in a suburb of Atlanta. Margaret greeted us at the door with freshly baked cookies and a warm smile. She had Jake's eyes and a polished appearance, her silver-streaked hair perfectly styled, and her clothes impeccably pressed. So you're the girl who's stolen my son's heart, she said, embracing me. Her perfume, something floral and expensive, lingered as she led us into the living room filled with family photos. Most of them featured Jake at various ages, with Margaret always by his side. That weekend went better than I could have hoped. Margaret asked about my studies, my family, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. When I mentioned losing my mother, her eyes softened with sympathy. You poor dear, she said, patting my hand. Well, you have me now. Those words felt like a healing balm to my orphaned heart. After graduation, Jake proposed under the old oak tree on campus where we'd had our first kiss. Of course I said yes. When we called Margaret with the news, her excitement seemed genuine. I've always wanted a daughter, she told me, and I believed her. The wedding planning brought Margaret and me even closer. She had opinions on everything from the flowers to the venue, but I didn't mind. I appreciated her input and experience. When I found my dream dress, a vintage-inspired lace gown, Margaret teared up and said I looked beautiful. She helped address invitations, arranged meetings with vendors, and even hosted my bridal shower at her home. Our wedding day was perfect. Margaret gave a touching speech about welcoming me into the family and how proud she was to gain a daughter. As Jake and I danced our first dance as husband and wife, I caught sight of Margaret watching us, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. After a honeymoon in Hawaii, Jake and I settled into a small but charming house just 15 minutes from Margaret's. Jake had secured a job at an engineering firm in Atlanta, and I found a position teaching 3rd grade at a local elementary school. Margaret seemed thrilled to have us nearby and quickly established a tradition of Sunday dinners at her house. Those early days of marriage were blissful. Margaret and I developed routines together that I cherished. On Saturdays, we often went shopping at the farmer's market, selecting fresh vegetables and flowers. She taught me her secret recipe for peach cobbler, a family tradition passed down from her grandmother. We spent afternoons in her garden, where she showed me how to nurture her prized roses and which herbs grew best in Georgia's climate. You have a natural green thumb, Ramona, she would say as I helped her prune her hydrangeas. Just like me. In those moments, I felt like I'd finally found what I'd been missing since my mother died. Margaret seemed to fill that maternal role so perfectly that I occasionally caught myself almost calling her Mom. I confessed this to her once, and she hugged me tightly. I would be honoured, she said. There were small signs looking back that I should have paid more attention to. The way Margaret would rearrange items in our kitchen during visits, explaining that this is the way it should be done. How she would call Jake multiple times a day to check in. Her subtle comments about my cooking or housekeeping always framed as helpful advice, but carrying an undercurrent of criticism. Jake likes his shirts folded this way, dear. She would say, refolding laundry I had already put away. Or, that's an interesting way to make pasta sauce. In our family, we've always added a pinch of sugar to cut the acidity, but these moments were easy to dismiss. After all, wasn't this what mothers did? Didn't they teach and guide and sometimes critique out of love? Without my own mother as a reference point, I had no way of knowing where normal maternal behavior ended and something else began. The real joy came when after a year of marriage I discovered I was pregnant. Jake spun me around our kitchen when I told him, both of us laughing and crying at the same time. When we shared the news with Margaret over Sunday dinner, she clapped her hands together and immediately began talking about nursery themes and baby names. A grandchild, she said, her eyes shining. This is the greatest gift you could give me. In that moment, watching her excitement and feeling Jake's hand squeeze mine under the table, I felt complete. We were a family spanning 3 generations, now bound by love and shared blood. I had no idea that the birth of our child, rather than cementing our family bonds, would be the beginning of their unraveling. The shift in Margaret's behavior was subtle at first, so gradual that I almost didn't notice it. As my pregnancy progressed, her suggestions became more frequent and insistent. What had once seemed like gentle guidance now felt like criticism. When we revealed that we were thinking of naming our daughter Emma after my late mother, Margaret's smile tightened. Emma is so common these days, she said dismissively. What about Caroline? It's a family name on our side. Jake and I had spent weeks deciding on Emma's name, but when I glanced at him for support, he merely shrugged. Caroline is pretty too, he said, avoiding my eyes. It was the first time I felt a flicker of betrayal from my husband, but I quickly pushed it aside. Pregnancy hormones, I told myself. I was being oversensitive. The nursery became another battleground. I had envisioned a woodland theme with soft greens and yellows, but Margaret insisted that pink was the only proper colour for a baby girl's room. Trust me, Ramona, she said, showing up one day with cans of ballet slipper pink paint. I've done this before, remember? She looked pointedly at my growing belly. You haven't. As my due date approached, Margaret began stopping by our house unannounced. She would bring casseroles we didn't ask for, rearrange furniture to make it safer for the baby, and offer constant advice about everything from prenatal vitamins to how I should be sleeping. You really shouldn't be drinking coffee at all, she scolded one morning, taking my half-full mug and dumping it down the sink. It's bad for the baby. When I mentioned this to Jake, he sighed. She's just excited about the baby Mona, and she does know more about this than we do. But it's my pregnancy, I protested, and my doctor said 1 cup of coffee a day is fine. Jake's expression softened as he pulled me into a hug. I know it's tough, but try to be patient with her. She's been alone since Dad died, and this baby means everything to her. I bit back my response. This baby means everything to us too. My birth plan was carefully researched and written. I wanted minimal medical interventions, if possible skin-to-skin contact immediately after birth, and just Jake in the delivery room with me. Margaret had other ideas. Natural childbirth, she scoffed when I mentioned it during Sunday dinner. Don't be a martyr, Ramona. There's no medal for suffering. I had an epidural with Jake and he turned out just fine. Every woman is different, I tried to explain. I just want to try without interventions first. Margaret looked at Jake. Talk some sense into your wife. There's no reason for her to put herself through unnecessary pain. Again, Jake failed to support me. Maybe Mom has a point, he said. I hate the thought of you suffering if you don't have to. By the time Emma arrived a week past her due date, and after 23 hours of labour, that did indeed end with an epidural, I was exhausted physically and emotionally. The joy of holding my daughter for the first time was indescribable, but even that sacred moment was intruded upon by Margaret, who had somehow convinced a nurse to let her into the delivery room just minutes after Emma was born. Let me see my granddaughter, she cooed, practically snatching Emma from my arms before I had fully recovered from the birth. The first 2 weeks after bringing Emma home were a nightmare disguised as help. Margaret insisted on staying with us, taking over the guest room and establishing herself as the authority on all things baby-related. She would hover while I nursed, making comments about Emma's latch or suggesting I wasn't producing enough milk. She's still hungry, Margaret would insist after I'd finished a feeding. I can tell by the way she's fussing. When Jake was a baby, I supplemented with formula and he slept through the night by 6 weeks. The breaking point came when I walked into the nursery one afternoon to find Margaret feeding 3-week-old Emma formula from a bottle. I hadn't pumped any milk, which meant she had brought the formula herself, deliberately going against my clearly stated wishes to exclusively breastfeed. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice shaking with anger and exhaustion. Margaret looked up, completely unruffled. "Emma was hungry and you were napping. A good grandmother doesn't let her grandbaby go hungry. I've asked you repeatedly not to give her formula," I said, taking Emma from her arms. "We've discussed this." "Don't be so controlling, Ramona," Margaret said with a dismissive wave. "Formula won't hurt her. Jake had both and he's perfectly healthy." When I brought this up to Jake that evening, his response left me feeling utterly alone. "Mum was just trying to help," he said, not looking up from his phone. "You've been so tired lately, and she thought she was doing you a favor by letting you sleep." "But she deliberately went against what we decided for our daughter," I insisted. "Doesn't that bother you?" Jake finally looked at me, his expression a mix of exhaustion and irritation. "What bothers me is that you and my mother can't seem to get along anymore. She's been nothing but helpful and all you do is criticize her." His words stung like a slap. Was that how he saw the situation? That I was the problem? "I'm going to take a shower," he muttered, walking away and effectively ending the conversation. That night, as I nursed Emma in the rocking chair, tears streaming down my face, I realized something had fundamentally shifted in my marriage. The united front Jake and I had once presented was crumbling, and I wasn't sure how to fix it. Over the next few months, I attempted to establish some boundaries with Margaret. I suggested that she call before coming over, rather than using her key to let herself in whenever she pleased. I asked that she respect our parenting decisions, even if they differed from how she had raised Jake. My attempts at setting boundaries were met with passive-aggressive responses that made me question my own sanity. I didn't realize I needed an appointment to see my own granddaughter. She would say, her voice dripping with hurt. Or, "I'm sorry for caring too much. Next time I'll just stay away and let you figure everything out on your own." Jake, tired of being caught in the middle, began working longer hours. He would leave early in the morning and return late, missing Emma's bath time and bedtime routine. When he was home, he was distant, spending more time on his phone or laptop than engaging with Emma or me. Meanwhile, Margaret had begun telling friends and family members that I was suffering from postpartum depression. "Poor Ramona," I overheard her saying on the phone one day. "She's just not coping well. Very emotional, snapping at everyone. I'm doing everything I can to support her and the baby, but you know how these young mothers can be. They think they know everything." The worst part was that people believed her. Friends who visited would give me concerned looks and ask in hushed tones how I was really doing. My friend Tara, who had been my bridesmaid, stopped inviting me to girls' nights, later admitting that Margaret had suggested I needed space to focus on the baby. I was being isolated, my support system slowly chipped away, and I felt powerless to stop it. When Emma turned 6 months old, I decided to return to work part-time. Teaching had always been my passion, and I hoped that reclaiming that part of my identity might help me feel more like myself again. I arranged to teach morning kindergarten classes 3 days a week, which would allow me to be home with Emma in the afternoons. The question of childcare loomed large. Daycare in our area was expensive and had long waiting lists. Before I could even begin researching options, Margaret offered a solution. "I'll watch Emma while you work," she said during Sunday dinner. "It makes perfect sense. Why pay strangers when family is available?" Every instinct told me this was a bad idea, but the practical benefits were undeniable. Margaret lived close by, would charge nothing, and genuinely loved Emma. Plus, Jake was enthusiastically supportive of the arrangement. "It's perfect," he said. "Emma gets quality time with her grandmother and we save money. Win-win." Against my better judgment, I agreed. I spent the week before returning to work preparing detailed instructions for Margaret Emma's feeding schedule, nap times, preferred toys, and the specific routine that helped her settle when fussy. Margaret listened with an indulgent smile, nodding along, but making it clear she thought my instructions were excessive. "Ramona, I raised a child already. I think I can handle a baby for a few hours." The first few weeks seemed to go smoothly. Emma was always happy when I picked her up, and Margaret reported that she had been an absolute angel. But small inconsistencies began to emerge. Emma, who had been sleeping through the night, started waking at odd hours. Her afternoon nap, which I had carefully established at 1 o'clock, seemed to be happening at random times. When I asked Margaret about this, she waved away my concerns. "Babies need flexibility, not rigid schedules. I let her sleep when she's tired and eat when she's hungry. Tiens. One day, I arrived to find Emma wearing an outfit I had never seen before, a frilly pink dress with matching headband. "Where did this come from?" I asked. "I picked it up while shopping yesterday," Margaret said. "The clothes you send her in are so plain, a little girl should look pretty." I bit my tongue, reminding myself that free childcare came with certain compromises. But the compromises kept multiplying. I discovered Margaret was feeding Emma jarred baby food despite my clear instructions that we were doing baby-led weaning. She was putting Emma down for naps in her own bedroom, rather than the portable crib I had set up. She had even begun referring to herself as Mama Margaret, a title uncomfortably close to Mama. The situation came to a head when Emma developed a rash on her legs and arms. Concerned, I took her to the pediatrician, who asked if she had been exposed to any new foods. "Not that I know of," I said. "We've been introducing foods slowly, one at a time." The doctor determined that Emma was having an allergic reaction to strawberries. The problem was, I hadn't given Emma strawberries yet. When I confronted Margaret, she became defensive. It was just a little bit of strawberry jam on her toast. All babies love sweet things. "We're introducing foods one at a time to watch for allergies," I explained, trying to keep my voice calm. And the pediatrician specifically said no berries until after her first birthday. "Oh, those doctors are too cautious these days," Margaret scoffed. "Jake had strawberries before he could walk and he was fine. One little rash isn't going to hurt her." I realized then that Margaret had likely been ignoring many of my instructions when I wasn't present. The thought made my stomach churn. What else had she been doing that I didn't know about? As Emma's first birthday approached, I suggested we have a small celebration at our house, with just a few close friends and their children. Margaret had other ideas. "I've already started planning her party," she announced one Sunday. "I'm thinking a princess theme. I've booked the community centre and ordered invitations." "You what?" I was stunned. "Margaret, we wanted something small at our house." "Don't be silly, Ramona. A first birthday is a milestone. Emma deserves a proper celebration." Despite my protests, Margaret forged ahead with her plans. The guest list grew to include dozens of people, many of whom were Margaret's friends, who barely knew Emma. The princess-themed extravaganza, complete with a professional photographer, elaborate cake, and hired princess performer, was a far cry from the intimate family celebration Jake and I had envisioned. On the day of the party, I felt like a guest rather than the mother of the birthday girl. Margaret took charge, carrying Emma around to show her off to her friends, orchestrating the gift opening, and even stepping in front of me when it came time to help Emma blow out her candle. "Look at the camera, Emma," Margaret cooed, positioning herself in the centre of the frame while I stood awkwardly to the side. Later that week, while searching for one of Emma's favourite toys, I opened the hall closet in Margaret's house to find a disturbing sight, a box filled with items from our home. There was jewellery I thought I had misplaced, several of Jake's childhood mementos I kept on his desk, and even some of Emma's baby clothes that I had been saving as keepsakes. My hands trembled as I looked through the items. Why would Margaret take these things from our home? Was she collecting mementos, or was there something more sinister at play? The invasion of privacy felt profound and unsettling. I carefully closed the box and the closet door, my mind racing. When I mentioned the discovery to Jake that evening, his dismissive response left me feeling even more isolated. "Mum probably just borrowed those things to show her friends," he said with a shrug. "Or maybe she's organising some kind of scrapbook for Emma. You know how sentimental she is." "Jake, she took these things without asking," I insisted. "Doesn't that bother you?" He sighed heavily, the sound I had come to associate with any conversation involving his mother. "Can we please not do this tonight? I had a long day at work." The distance between us was growing wider by the day, and I didn't know how to bridge it. Meanwhile, Margaret had begun planting seeds of doubt about my parenting to Jake during their private conversations I only learned about when Jake would suddenly question decisions we had previously agreed upon. "Mom thinks Emma should be fully weaned by now," he commented one evening as I nursed our daughter before bed. "Your mother thinks a lot of things," I replied, trying to keep the bitterness from my voice. But we agreed that we'd follow Emma's lead on this. Jake's expression hardened. "I'm just saying maybe Mom has a point. She raised me after all. And I'm raising our daughter," I said firmly. "I would appreciate it if you would discuss parenting decisions with me, not your mother." The tension in our house was becoming unbearable. Jake was working longer hours, ostensibly due to a big project at work, but I suspected he was avoiding the conflict at home. On weekends, he often went to help Margaret with projects around the house, leaving me alone with Emma for hours. My friends had become increasingly distant, many of them believing Margaret's narrative that I was difficult and controlling. Even my closest friend Tara had begun to pull away, cancelling plans last minute or being vague about getting together. It wasn't until months later that I discovered why. Margaret had been spreading rumours in our social circle, telling people that I was unstable, that I was keeping Emma away from her, that I was making Jake miserable. She portrayed herself as the suffering grandmother and me as the villain. The isolation was crushing. I felt like I was drowning in plain sight with no one willing to throw me a lifeline. Then came the discovery that truly shook me. While cleaning under our bed, I found a spare house key hidden in a small box. When I showed it to Jake, he looked genuinely confused. "I have no idea where that came from," he said. A chill ran down my spine as I remembered giving Margaret a spare key when we first moved in for emergencies only. A key she had claimed to have lost months ago, leading us to change the locks. Yet here was a key and it fit our new locks perfectly. The implication was clear. Margaret had made a copy before returning the original, giving herself unlimited access to our home even after we thought we had secured our privacy. The next day, I confronted her directly when she came to pick up Emma for their regular grandmother day. "Did you make a copy of our house key without telling us?" I asked, showing her the key I had found. For a brief moment, surprise flickered across her face before she composed herself. "Of course not. I would never do such a thing." "Then how do you explain this?" I pressed. "It was hidden under our bed." Margaret's expression hardened. "I don't appreciate being accused in my own family, Ramona. If you found a key, perhaps you should ask your husband about it before jumping to conclusions." "I did ask Jake. He has no idea where it came from." "Well, neither do I." She reached for Emma, who was on my hip. "Now are we going to stand here arguing, or can I take my granddaughter for our special day together?" The confrontation ended in a stalemate, with Margaret taking Emma as planned, and me left feeling even more powerless and confused. Was I overreacting? Was I seeing problems where none existed? But the evidence was mounting and my instincts were screaming that something was deeply wrong with this relationship. I just didn't know how to fix it, or if it could be fixed at all. The discovery of a second pregnancy should have been a moment of joy. Jake and I hadn't been actively trying for another baby, but we hadn't been preventing it either. When the test showed positive, I felt a complex mix of emotions: happiness at the thought of giving Emma a sibling, anxiety about managing 2 young children, and dread at how Margaret would react. I told Jake first, of course. His response was enthusiastic, but distracted a quick hug and, "That's great, babe," before returning to his email. The distance between us had grown so vast that even this monumental news couldn't fully bridge it. We decided to tell Margaret together at the next Sunday dinner. I hoped that perhaps this news would reset our relationship, give us a fresh start. "We have some exciting news," Jake announced as Margaret served dessert. "Ramona's pregnant. Emma's going to be a big sister." I watched Margaret's face carefully. Unlike her exuberant reaction to my first pregnancy, this time, her smile seemed forced, her congratulations hollow. "How wonderful," she said, her tone not matching her words. "Though I hope you're not rushing into this, Ramona. Emma is still so young and you've seemed overwhelmed lately." The comment stung, especially because Jake didn't contradict it. Instead, he quickly changed the subject to safer territory, asking his mother about her garden club meeting. In the weeks that followed, Margaret's behavior became even more concerning. She began planning a family vacation to Florida, making all the arrangements without consulting me. "I've booked a beach house for the last week of July," she announced one Sunday. "Jake has already requested the time off work." "July," I echoed, mentally calculating. "But I'll be 7 months pregnant then." Margaret waved away my concern. "The sea air will be good for you, and I'll be there to help with Emma so you can rest." I should really check with my doctor before committing to a long car trip that late in pregnancy, I said, looking to Jake for support. "It's just a car ride, Mona," he said. "And like Mum said, she'll help with Emma." I felt invisible, my valid concerns dismissed by both of them. The united front they presented left no room for my input, even regarding my own pregnancy. As the pregnancy progressed, I experienced more severe morning sickness than I had with Emma. There were days when I could barely get out of bed, relying on Jake to take care of Emma before work, and then struggling through the day until he returned. Margaret, rather than offering genuine help, seemed to view my illness with suspicion. "Some women do exaggerate pregnancy symptoms for attention," she remarked to Jake within my earshot. I worked full-time when I was carrying Jake and never missed a day. Her comments planted seeds of doubt in Jake's mind. I could see it in the way he sometimes looked at me when I said I was too nauseous to eat dinner or too tired to attend a social event. The unspoken question hung in the air. Was I really sick or just making excuses? Jake began spending more time away from home claiming work responsibilities, but often ending up at his mother's house. They would have dinner together while I stayed home with Emma, battling nausea and exhaustion. When I called to ask when he would be home, I could hear Margaret in the background, her voice a constant presence in our marriage. The most hurtful development came when I learnt through a mutual friend that Margaret had been suggesting to family members that my second pregnancy might have come as a surprise to Jake. The implication was clear. She was questioning my fidelity and the paternity of our unborn child. The accusation was so outrageous that at first I couldn't believe she would stoop so low. But when I confronted Jake about it, his hesitation before denying it told me everything I needed to know. The seed of doubt had been planted in his mind as well. Your mother is telling people this baby might not be yours, I said, my voice shaking with anger and hurt. How can you let her get away with that? She's not saying that exactly, Jake hedged. She just mentioned that we seem to be having problems and then suddenly you were pregnant. And you didn't defend me, your wife. The betrayal cut deep. Jake, I have never been unfaithful to you. Never. He reached for my hand, his expression apologetic. I know that, Mona. Of course I know that. Mum just worries about me, that's all. But the damage was done. The trust between us, already fragile, had suffered another blow. It all came to a head at a dinner at Margaret's house, when I was 5 months pregnant. Jake had insisted we attend despite my fatigue and persistent nausea, saying his mother had prepared all my favourite foods as a peace offering. The evening started tensely but civilly. Margaret had indeed prepared a lovely meal, though the sight and smell of food still made my stomach turn. I pushed the food around my plate, taking tiny bites to be polite, while fighting waves of nausea. Not hungry, Ramona? Margaret asked sweetly. I went to all this trouble, the least you could do is eat. The food is delicious, I said carefully. I'm just still dealing with morning sickness. At 5 months, Margaret raised a skeptical eyebrow. That's unusual. With Jake, my nausea stopped at exactly 12 weeks. I bit back a retort about how every pregnancy is different. This was supposed to be a peace offering dinner after all. The conversation moved to the topic of Emma's upcoming second birthday. I mentioned that I was thinking of a small celebration at the park with a picnic and some simple games. Oh, I've already started planning her party, Margaret interjected. I'm thinking a Cinderella theme this year. I've even found the perfect little carriage for her to sit in for photos. Margaret, I said, trying to keep my voice level, we appreciate your enthusiasm, but Jake and I would like to plan Emma's birthday ourselves this year. Margaret's expression hardened. I see. So you're going to deprive Emma of a proper birthday celebration because you're feeling territorial. That's not what I said, I began, but Margaret continued as if I hadn't spoken. Jake, tell your wife that Emma deserves better than some sad little picnic in the park. I looked at Jake, silently pleading with him to support me just this once. He cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. Maybe we could compromise, he suggested. A small party, but with Mom's help. There's no compromise needed, Margaret declared. I'm Emma's grandmother. I have rights too. Something inside me snapped. All the months of undermining criticism and manipulation coalesced into a moment of perfect clarity and courage. No, Margaret, I said firmly. You don't have rights to our daughter. Jake and I are her parents. We make the decisions about her life, her birthday parties, everything. Not you. The room fell silent. Margaret stared at me, her face reddening with anger. Jake looked between us, his expression panicked. How dare you speak to me that way in my own home? Margaret finally said, her voice low and dangerous. After everything I've done for you, after I welcomed you into this family, I'm grateful for the good things you've done, I replied, my hands shaking but my voice steady. But I'm not grateful for the way you've tried to control our lives, spread rumors about me, or undermine my parenting. Margaret stood up so quickly her chair tipped backward. You ungrateful, manipulative girl, you've turned my son against me from the beginning. You've tried to keep my granddaughter from me. Mom, please, Jake interjected, finally finding his voice. Ramona hasn't done any of those things. But Margaret was beyond reasoning with. She pointed a shaking finger at me, her face contorted with rage. You make me want to curse you for life, she shouted. You and that baby you're carrying. Her words hung in the air like poison. I felt as if I'd been physically struck, my hands instinctively moving to my belly to protect my unborn child. Jake sat frozen, his face pale with shock. I stood up slowly, gathering what dignity I could. "We're leaving," I said quietly to Jake. "Now." Without waiting for a response, I walked out to the car, tears streaming down my face. After a few minutes, Jake joined me, his expression unreadable. The drive home was silent, the weight of Margaret's curse hanging between us. When we arrived home, I went straight to the bedroom while Jake put Emma to bed. I lay there in the dark, feeling utterly broken. The woman who had once promised to be like a mother to me had just wished harm on me and my unborn child. And my husband, the man who had vowed to stand by me, had sat in silence while it happened. Something had to change. I couldn't live like this anymore, constantly walking on eggshells, always the villain in Margaret's narrative. I couldn't raise my children in this toxic environment. As I lay there in the dark, one hand resting on my growing belly, I made a decision. This was rock bottom, but I wasn't going to stay here. For my children, for myself, I would find a way out of this darkness. The morning after Margaret's curse, I called in sick to work and waited until Jake had left for the office before packing a small bag for Emma and myself. I needed space to think, to breathe, to figure out what to do next. My friend Tara had moved out of state months ago, part of the social circle that had gradually distanced themselves from me due to Margaret's influence. But I still had one friend who might understand, my college roommate Diana, who lived about an hour away. I called her from the car, Emma babbling happily in her car seat behind me. "Do I need a place to stay for a few days?" I said, my voice cracking. "Things with Jake and his mother have gotten really bad." Diana, bless her, didn't hesitate. "Come over. Stay as long as you need. I'll work from home today." The relief of having somewhere to go, someone who still cared about me, brought fresh tears to my eyes. "Thank you," I managed. "We'll be there in about an hour." Jake called repeatedly throughout the day, his messages growing increasingly frantic and then angry. "Where are you? Why did you take Emma? Come home now, Ramona. This is ridiculous." I texted him only to say that Emma and I were safe, that I needed some time to think and that I would call him tomorrow. Then I turned off my phone, unable to deal with his demands or accusations. Diana's small guest room became our refuge. That night, after Emma was asleep, I told Diana everything: Margaret's escalating behavior, Jake's failure to support me, and finally the curse that had been the breaking point. "Ramona," Diana said gently when I finished, "what your mother-in-law is doing isn't just annoying or overbearing. It's emotional abuse. And Jake is enabling it." Hearing someone else name what was happening gave me a strange sense of validation. I wasn't crazy, I wasn't overreacting. What was happening to me was real and wrong. The next day, with Diana's encouragement, I made an appointment with a therapist who specialized in family dynamics. Dr. Kamala Singh had a calm, steady presence that put me at ease immediately. "Tell me what brought you here today," she said, and I found myself pouring out the whole story from the early days with Margaret to the cursing incident. Dr. Singh listened without judgment, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, she nodded thoughtfully. "What you're describing sounds like a classic case of narcissistic behavior from your mother-in-law and enabling behavior from your husband," she said. "The isolation from friends, the constant criticism, the invasion of privacy, the triangulation between you and your husband, these are all common tactics used by people with narcissistic tendencies to maintain control." Her words were like puzzle pieces falling into place. "So I'm not overreacting?" I asked, still seeking confirmation. "Not at all," Dr. Singh assured me. "In fact, based on what you've described, you've been remarkably patient. But now you need to focus on protecting yourself and your children from this toxic dynamic." Over the next few weeks, I met with Dr. Singh twice a week. She helped me understand the patterns in my relationship with Margaret and Jake and gave me tools to set and maintain healthy boundaries. She suggested books and articles about toxic family dynamics that opened my eyes to just how common my situation was. Meanwhile, Jake's calls and texts oscillated between pleas for me to come home and angry accusations that I was being selfish and hurting Emma by keeping her away from him. I allowed him to visit Emma at Diana's house, but kept our interactions brief and focused on our daughter. "You need to come home," he would insist each time. "Emma needs both her parents. And what about the baby? Do you want our children growing up in a broken home?" "Our home is already broken, Jake," I replied during one such conversation. "Your mother has inserted herself into every aspect of our marriage and parenting, and you've let her. That's what's broken our home." One positive development during this difficult time was reconnecting with old friends who Margaret had successfully alienated. My college friend Beth reached out after hearing from Diana about my situation. "I always felt something was off with the way your mother-in-law talked about you," she admitted. "She once told me you didn't want visitors because you were too fragile after Emma was born. When I tried to reach out anyway, you seemed distant, so I backed off. I never said I didn't want visitors. I told her, another piece of the puzzle clicking into place. I was desperate for adult company during those early months. Similar conversations with other friends revealed the extent of Margaret's campaign to isolate me. She had told some that I was struggling with postpartum depression and needed space. She had implied to others that I was controlling and didn't want Jake's friends around. She had even suggested to my work colleagues, us, that I was overwhelmed and shouldn't be bothered with social invitations. Learning how deliberately I had been cut off from my support system filled me with a cold anger that was somehow more powerful than the hot reactive emotion I had felt before. This wasn't just a difficult mother-in-law situation. This was calculated emotional abuse. With Dr. Singh's encouragement, I began attending a support group for people dealing with narcissistic family members. Hearing others' stories so similar to my own was both heartbreaking and healing. I wasn't alone, and if others had found ways to establish boundaries and protect themselves, maybe I could too. During this time, I also reconnected with my own father and brother relationships that had become strained after my marriage. Margaret had subtly discouraged these connections, always finding reasons why we couldn't visit them or why they shouldn't visit us. Now free from her influence, I reached out and they responded with love and support. I never liked the way she looked at you, like you weren't good enough for her son, my father admitted during one phone call. But I didn't want to interfere in your marriage. I wish you had said something, Dad. I told him, wishing I had seen the red flags earlier myself. Jake, meanwhile, was still firmly in his mother's camp. During one of his visits with Emma, he revealed that Margaret was beside herself with grief over not seeing her granddaughter. She cries every day, Ramona, he said accusingly. Is that what you wanted? To make an old woman cry? What I want is to be treated with respect, I replied. What I want is a husband who stands up for his wife and children, not one who allows his mother to curse his unborn child. Jake flinched at that. It was the first sign that perhaps deep down he recognized how wrong his mother's behavior had been. As I approached the 3rd month of separation with my pregnancy, now showing clearly, I knew it was time to make some decisions. I couldn't stay at Diana's indefinitely, and Emma needed stability. The therapy and support group had given me strength and clarity I hadn't possessed before. I was ready to take a stand not just for myself, but for my children. I had spent weeks documenting every incident I could remember, dates, times, exactly what was said and done. I had gathered text messages, emails, and even recordings of conversations where Margaret had been manipulative or Jake had failed to support me. I had testimonies from friends about things Margaret had said about me behind my back. Armed with this evidence and the tools Dr. Singh had given me, I was ready for a confrontation. Not a heated emotional exchange like the one that had led to Margaret's curse, but a calm factual presentation of the boundaries I needed to establish if there was any hope of salvaging my marriage. I called Jake and requested a meeting, suggesting we meet at a neutral location with both Margaret and him present. I want to discuss how we move forward, I said. All of us. Jake sounded relieved, clearly assuming this meant I was giving in and coming home. That's great, Mona. Mum will be so happy to hear you're being reasonable. I bit back a retort. Let him think what he wanted for now. The important thing was getting them both in the same room where they would have to face the truth of what had been happening. We arranged to meet at a private room in a local restaurant, a place public enough that it would discourage extreme behaviour, but private enough for an honest conversation. Diana agreed to watch Emma, giving me the freedom to focus completely on the confrontation ahead. The night before the meeting, I rehearsed what I would say with Dr. Singh, preparing for various reactions and scenarios. Remember, she told me, you're not asking for permission to have boundaries. You're informing them of what your boundaries are and what the consequences will be if they're not respected. As I drove to the meeting, my hands steady on the wheel, despite the gravity of what lay ahead, I felt a strange calm. Whatever happened today, I would no longer be a victim. I was taking back control of my life, my marriage, and my family. The time for allowing myself to be manipulated and mistreated was over. I arrived at the restaurant 15 minutes early, wanting to be settled and composed when Jake and Margaret arrived. The private dining room I had reserved was small but elegant, with a round table that would allow us all to see each other clearly. I had brought a folder containing printouts of texts, emails, and my detailed documentation of Margaret's behaviour over the years. I placed it on the table in front of me, a silent reminder of the strength of my position. Jake arrived first, looking both hopeful and wary. He leaned in to kiss my cheek, but I turned slightly so that his lips landed on air. His expression fell, but he recovered quickly. "You look good, Mona," he said, taking the seat across from me. "How are you feeling? Is the baby okay?" "We're both fine," I replied evenly. "Where's your mother?" "She's parking the car." "She'll be in soon." Jake fidgeted with his napkin. "So are you thinking of coming home?" "Emma asks for me every night, you know." I kept my expression neutral. "We'll discuss everything when Margaret gets here. I want to have this conversation once with both of you present." As if on cue, Margaret swept into the room, her face arranged in what I now recognized as her martyred expression. She was dressed impeccably as always, not a hair out of place. "Ramona," she said coolly, taking the seat beside Jake. "I hope you've called this meeting to apologize for your behavior and to bring my granddaughter home where she belongs." I took a deep breath, reminding myself of Dr. Singh's advice. Stay calm, stick to the facts. Don't get drawn into emotional manipulation. "Thank you both for coming," so I began. "I've asked to meet with you because we need to discuss some serious issues that have been affecting our family. Over the past few years, a pattern of behavior has developed that is unhealthy and destructive, and it needs to change if we're going to move forward." Margaret scoffed. "If you're referring to your abandonment of your husband and taking my granddaughter away, then yes, that behavior certainly needs to change." I ignored her interruption and continued. "Since Emma was born, there have been numerous instances where boundaries have been crossed, privacy invaded, and my role as Emma's mother undermined." I opened my folder and began methodically listing incidents, days, and specific details. I described how Margaret had given Emma formula against my wishes, how she had spread rumours about me to friends and family, how she had taken items from our home without permission, how she had made a copy of our house key without our knowledge. I detailed the ways she had tried to isolate me from my support system, the passive-aggressive comments, the criticism, and finally the curse she had hurled at me and my unborn child. As I spoke, I watched their faces. Margaret's expression shifted from dismissive to shocked as she realized how thoroughly I had documented her behavior. Jake looked increasingly uncomfortable, his eyes darting between his mother and me. "These are lies," Margaret finally interrupted, her voice shaking with anger. "Exaggerations and lies from a woman who has always been jealous of my relationship with my son." I slid a stack of papers across the table. "These are text messages between you and various friends of mine, where you told them I was suffering from postpartum depression and didn't want visitors. These are emails where you planned Emma's birthday party against my expressed wishes. And this," I said, pushing forward, "another document is a statement from our locksmith confirming that a copy of our new house key was made 2 days after we changed the locks, using a key that perfectly matched our new locks. A key that only you had access to, Margaret." The colour drained from Margaret's face as she realised the extent of the evidence I had gathered. Jake picked up the papers, his expression growing more troubled as he read. "Mum," he said slowly, "did you really tell Tara that Ramona was keeping Emma away from you? That she was an unfit mother?" Margaret's composure cracked slightly. "I was upset. She was being so difficult about the birthday party, and I just needed someone to talk to." "And this," Jake held up another printout, "telling my boss that Ramona was having mental health issues and that's why I needed to leave work early so often. That wasn't you being upset. That was you deliberately trying to make Ramona look unstable." A small spark of hope ignited in my chest. For the first time, Jake was seeing through his mother's manipulations. I pressed on, my voice calm but firm. "The way things have been cannot continue. If there's any hope for our marriage, for our family, things need to change." I looked directly at Margaret. "I will not allow my children to grow up in an environment where their mother is undermined and disrespected. I will not subject myself to your control or your criticism any longer." I turned to Jake. "And I need a husband who puts his wife and children first, who stands up for us, who is a true partner rather than a mediator between his mother and his family." I laid out my non-negotiable boundaries. Margaret would not have unsupervised access to our children. She would not have a key to our home. She would not make decisions about our children's upbringing, celebrations, or activities. She would respect our parenting choices without criticism or interference. And most importantly, Jake would support these boundaries consistently and without exception. If these boundaries cannot be respected, I concluded, then I am prepared to make this separation permanent. I love you, Jake, but I will not sacrifice my well-being or our children's emotional health for this marriage. The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Margaret was the first to break it, her voice trembling with rage. "How dare you threaten to keep my grandchildren from me?" she hissed. "Jake, are you going to sit there and let her speak to me this way? After everything I've done for you?" Jake looked torn, the conflict playing across his face. This was the moment of truth. Would he continue to enable his mother's behavior, or would he finally stand with me? "Mom," he said finally, his voice unexpectedly firm. "Ramona is right. The things you've done, the things in these documents, they're not okay. They're not what a loving mother or grandmother does." "Time it in." Margaret's eyes widened in disbelief. "You're taking her side against your own mother." "I'm not taking sides," Jake replied. "I'm acknowledging the truth. I've been blind to it for too long, making excuses, looking the other way. But I can't do that anymore." He turned to me, his eyes filled with regret. "I'm sorry, Mona. I should have stood up for you long ago. I should have protected you and Emma from this." Margaret's face contorted with anger. "After everything I've sacrificed for you, this is how you repay me, by betraying me for her." She jabbed a finger in my direction. "This isn't betrayal, Mom," Jake said steadily. "This is me being a husband and father. This is me finally doing what I should have done years ago." I looked directly at Margaret, drawing on all the strength I had built over the past months. "You can curse me if you want, Margaret. You can rage and threaten and manipulate, but you will never control me or my family again." Tank. The words hung in the air between us, powerful and irrevocable. Margaret's face, usually so carefully composed, crumpled in shock. The colour drained from her cheeks, leaving her pale as paper. For the first time since I had known her, she seemed truly speechless, the realization dawning that her tactics no longer held power over me or Jake. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This isn't over," she said, but the threat sounded hollow, the words of someone who knew they had lost but wasn't ready to admit defeat. "Actually, Mom, it is over," Jake said firmly. "The way things have been is over. If you want to be part of our lives going forward, it will be on the terms Ramona has outlined. No exceptions." Margaret stared at her son in disbelief, then at me with naked hatred. Without another word, she gathered her purse and stormed out of the room, the door slamming behind her. Jake and I sat in silence for a moment, the weight of what had just happened settling around us. Then he reached across the table, his hand open in invitation rather than a demand. "I've failed you," he said simply. "I don't know if you can forgive me for that, but I want to try to make it right. I want our family back, Mona, Yumi, Emma, and the baby." I looked at his outstretched hand, feeling the tug of love and history between us, but also the caution born from years of betrayal. "It won't be easy," I said. "We have a lot of work to do, trust to rebuild." "I know," he nodded. "But I'm ready to do that work, whatever it takes." Slowly, I placed my hand in his, not a surrender, but a cautious first step toward reconciliation. "So am I." As we left the restaurant together, I felt lighter than I had in years, as if I had set down a burden I had been carrying for too long. The road ahead would not be easy, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hope for our future. The months following our confrontation with Margaret were challenging but transformative. Jake and I moved into a new house, farther from his mother and symbolically free from the memories of her intrusions. We began couples therapy with Dr. Singh, unpacking years of damaging patterns and learning to communicate honestly and directly. Margaret's initial reaction to our united front was predictable, a campaign of tears, guilt, and manipulation. She called Jake constantly, alternating between raging accusations and pitiful pleas. She showed up at our new house unannounced, only to find that we had installed a security system and wouldn't let her in. She even attempted to contact my father, hoping to enlist him in convincing me to stop this nonsense. When these tactics failed, she tried a new approach, apologizing to Jake, but notably not to me, and promising to try harder to respect our boundaries. Jake, to his credit, held firm. "Actions, not words, Mom," he told her. "We need to see consistent change before we can consider unsupervised visits with Emma." The birth of our son Leo was a turning point. We had made it clear to Margaret that she would not be at the hospital during the delivery, a boundary she reluctantly accepted. When we invited her to meet her grandson a week after his birth, it was on our terms, a short visit at our home with both Jake and me present the entire time. She arrived with an enormous gift basket and a smile that seemed strained but genuine. "He's beautiful," she said softly, looking at Leo but not asking to hold him. "He has Jake's nose." "Would you like to hold him?" I offered a small olive branch. Margaret's eyes widened in surprise. "Yes, I would, thank you." As she cradled Leo with Emma peering curiously from Jake's lap, I saw a glimpse of what could have been, what might still be possible with clear boundaries and consistent enforcement. Not the controlling, manipulative relationship of the past, but something new and healthier. "I've been seeing someone," Margaret confessed during that visit. At our confused looks, she clarified, "A therapist. She's helping me understand some things about myself, about why I act the way I do sometimes." It was the closest thing to an acknowledgement of her behaviour that we had ever received, and though it wasn't a direct apology, it was a start. Over the following months, we established a careful routine of supervised visits. Margaret was allowed to see the children once a week, always with either Jake or me present. She was not given a key to our new home. She was not consulted on parenting decisions. And if she slipped into old patterns of criticism or boundary pushing, the visit ended immediately. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks, moments when Margaret reverted to manipulation or when Jake struggled to stand firm. There were family members who didn't understand our boundaries and accused me of being cruel or unforgiving. But we held our ground, united in our commitment to creating a healthy environment for our children. Jake's transformation was perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this journey. Through therapy and honest self-reflection, he began to recognize the patterns that had led him to enable his mother's behavior for so long. "I was trained from childhood to put her emotional needs first," he admitted during one therapy session. "To be her protector, her confidant, her emotional spouse after my dad died. I never learned how to say no to her, how to have healthy boundaries." As he untangled these patterns, he became a stronger husband and father. He took on more childcare responsibilities, allowing me to return to teaching part-time. He defended our boundaries without prompting handling difficult conversations with his mother, so that I didn't have to. And most importantly, he became my true partner, something I had longed for since the early days of our marriage. My own healing journey continued as well. Through therapy and the support group, I learned to trust my instincts again, to recognize manipulation before it took hold, and to stand firm in my boundaries without guilt or apology. I reconnected with friends who had been pushed away during Margaret's campaign of isolation, rebuilding my support network. Some friendships couldn't be salvaged. Tara, who had believed Margaret's narrative about me for years, sent a half-hearted apology text, but made no real effort to reconnect. I realized that true friends would have questioned Margaret's version of events rather than accepting it at face value, and I became more discerning about who I allowed into my inner circle. By the time Leo was 6 months old, our new normal had begun to feel stable and secure. Margaret, while not transformed completely, had made genuine progress in respecting our boundaries. She no longer showed up unannounced. She asked before picking up either child. She bit back criticisms about our parenting choices at least most of the time. One Sunday afternoon, as we prepared for Margaret's weekly visit, Emma tugged at my hand. "Is Grandma coming today?" she asked. "Yes, honey," I replied, surprised by the genuine excitement in her voice. Under the new boundaries, Margaret had focused on being truly present with Emma, during visits playing games and reading stories, rather than undermining my parenting or trying to take over. The result was a healthier, more genuine relationship between grandmother and granddaughter. "I like when Grandma comes now," Emma said simply before skipping off to her toys. Her words brought unexpected tears to my eyes. This was what I had wanted all along. Not to cut Margaret out of our lives completely, but to create a family dynamic where everyone was respected, where love didn't come with conditions or control. Jake found me wiping my eyes in the kitchen and wrapped his arms around me from behind. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said, leaning into his embrace. "Just thinking about how far we've come." He kissed the top of my head. "Because of you, Mona. Because you were brave enough to stand up for what was right, even when I wasn't." I turned to face him. We did it together. Maybe not at first, but eventually. As we stood there in our kitchen, our children playing in the next room, I felt a profound sense of peace. The curse that Margaret had hurled at me in her moment of rage had not come to pass. Instead, it had become the catalyst for breaking free from a toxic dynamic that might otherwise have poisoned our family for generations. Sometimes the people who claim to love you the most can hurt you the deepest, but finding your voice is the first step to finding your freedom. Standing up for yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary not just for your own well-being, but for those who depend on you. The journey isn't easy, and the happy ending doesn't come without work and sacrifice. But the peace on the other side is worth fighting for. Have you ever had to take a stand against someone who tried to control you? Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that they're not alone. Remember, setting boundaries isn't about pushing people away. It's about teaching them how to be in your life in a healthy way. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it gives you courage for whatever battles you're facing in your own life.